Hello, welcome to another video. So today's video is going to be about J.K. Rowling's decision to retcon Hermione and make her black, and why I don't like that decision. So let's talk about it, as always. For starters, I don't want this to come across as like, oh, I'm glad Hermione's white, or that I want to erase black characters or anything like that. I'm a huge advocate for more black main characters, more people of color. Definitely support that. However, I don't think writing a character explicitly with a white framework and then never really speaking about colorism or racism as a concept within the Harry Potter universe, only to state like a decade later that Hermione is black, it comes off as like an afterthought, and I don't really know if it's the right move. Black characters deserve more nuance than that. And that's not nuance that J.K. Rowling necessarily has the lived experience or the background or the knowledge or the understanding to write on. And if they wanted to like do blind color casting for the Cursed Child theater production, then they could have easily done that with like the way they did it with Hamilton. I don't think there would be any issue with that either. But then J.K. Rowling went on to write that tweet about how she never said that Hermione wasn't black, and she's totally chill with black Hermione, and she loves Hermione being black, and that just makes the whole thing a little bit more complicated and a little bit more messy. I don't know, but yeah, let's talk about it. All of that being said, I wanted to frame colorism and racism in a different way that I think makes the conversation a little bit more complex and nuanced and interesting, and it could be a way to really expand on the socio-political aspect of Harry Potter, particularly between the human world and the magical world. And it involves Hermione explicitly being white and actually Harry being a person of color. Okay, so to start with this concept, we have to go all the way back to the Marauders. Snape, Wormtail, all of the Marauders, they're all different people of color, and it literally doesn't really matter. Black, white, brown, yellow, red, it doesn't matter because the magical world is not bound by the same race relations and historical atrocities that follow the human world around. Their power comes from their magic, not from their skin color. And this is something that's already very tangibly defined in the series. If you look at the purebloods and how they are the most well-respected, most prestigious people, and they look down upon those who have relationships with non-magical folk and also wizards who are Muggle-born. This is something that is already established in the wizarding world. Blood purity is how systems are upheld in the wizarding world, and that intersects with speciesism. If you look at the treatment of the elves and the spew initiatives that Hermione tries to instill, the way that everyone responds to that, and even how the elves act when they are treated with dignity and respect. So now that we have the background and the basis for what I am retconning the wizarding world to be like in the Marauders era, let's say that James Potter is a person of color. I know that on TikTok, people were fan casting him as Dev Patel. I like Dev Patel. It could be anyone you like. Someone who lived in the magical world, he never experienced racism because, again, race within the magical world was never the way people upheld systemic oppressions. James had the exact same storyline as he always did. And then he goes ahead and falls in love with Lily. And because Lily has these attachments to the human world, all of a sudden he's experiencing these things he's never experienced before. So abstractly, he can't really understand why Petunia and Vernon hate him so much. Like, he knew that there was animosity and tension between Petunia and Lily because Lily was someone who ended up being magical, but he had no idea why there was such hatred and prejudice, particularly against him, considering Lily had already been known to be magical for such a long time. Then Harry is born. Once he's given up to Dursleys, he is, for all intents and purposes, a part of their family. He is seen as some type of racial stain on the Dursley family. They treat him like trash because he doesn't look like them. This also makes Hermione's oppression more complex as well, because as someone who's grown up in England and is a sweet little white girl, she probably isn't facing any racial oppression, particularly because of where she lives. And so a sweet little white girl who works really hard and has never faced any issues regarding race moves to the magical world and is like struck with these incredibly oppressive systems like blood purity and magical oppression, and she's in shock. She works twice as hard to prove that she's just as good as any other wizard, and despite being best in her class, she's never fully able to shake off the label as Muggle-born. Very, very frequently within the books, Harry has to advocate for her, not just from the Malfoys, but people like Slughorn as well, saying things like, she's so bright for a Muggle-born. It's very impressive how bright she is, how smart she is for a Muggle-born. Sound familiar? Cut to the making of Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, and we get this super rich and complicated backstory regarding the relations between the human and magical world. Perhaps the conflict between race became too much. Muggles weren't able to oppress witches and wizards because of their color the same way that they were able to with humans. And because of that, they felt extremely threatened that their ways of upholding systems of power falls apart with magical folk around. This leads to war between the two worlds, headed by Grindelwald, a handsome white man, which is the beacon of power and security to the human world. Does this not sound like an extremely interesting intersection of culture differences and class systems? It adds complexity. It shows that not every country or world has the same way of thinking, and that their prejudices manifest in more ways than one, and that there are different methods of obtaining and upholding systems of power. I personally just generally don't understand why we have to frame the magical world in the exact same oppressive systems as the human world. Obviously, the blood purity is some type of representation of white supremacy, and the werewolf stigma is very reminiscent of the treatment and stigma around gay men during the AIDS and HIV endemic. However, I think there's something to be said about not specifically labeling Hermione's struggles as the struggles of a Black woman against white supremacies. When you explicitly label symbols and tell the consumer and reader how to interpret certain things, it makes it more difficult for a reader to insert or relate in capacities that they may have felt prior. For example, to reference Turning Red, I made a video that previously talked about how I felt that May turning into a panda was some type of representation and symbol of the compartmentalization of feelings and emotions that Chinese immigrant children are expected to do in their families. That being said, I saw someone on TikTok and they were saying how they felt like May's need to control the panda and to hide the panda and was some type of statement on the queer experience and being a closeted LGBTQ youth. And while Domi Shi has spoken out about the panda transformation, how it was supposed to be a symbol of puberty, I'm sure it would be difficult to see the LGBTQ or see the Chinese immigrant impacts in the same way if the puberty was explicitly stated to be interpreted as puberty in the movie itself. Prior to JK stating that Hermione is black, blood purity could be representative of any oppression that the reader wanted to absolve. And it can be super empowering to be able to read something and feel like good can beat that oppression. What do you guys think? I think that having a black Harry, or at least a mixed Harry and a black or brown James Potter, makes the dynamic between the Potters and the Dursleys a lot more interesting and very rich in terms of why they treated Harry the way they did. Like, how could you treat an innocent baby like that unless he's causing some type of societal stressor on your family? Maybe people don't want to be friends with Petunia anymore because she's raising a mixed baby, or maybe they were kicked out of certain societies. If I recall correctly, in the first book, in the first chapter, they're talking about how ordinary the Dursleys' lives are. Like, they live on Privet Drive and they live in a house that's extremely ordinary and looks just like the rest of the street. And then all of a sudden there's this kid that doesn't belong. And just despite him being magical, there's no way for anyone else to know why he doesn't belong, right? Like, the neighborhood doesn't know that he's magical, so why else would the Dursleys treat him like that? Maybe the reason is because the thing that makes him different isn't necessarily something he can hide. For example, his race. That causes extreme distress on the Dursley family, which causes them extreme resentment and animosity, which is only exacerbated when he starts exuding magical qualities. It's just a reminder of how the magical world is different. It's just a reminder that even though he's been such a smear on their reputation and their life and their world, once he goes to the magical world, he won't have to experience the same things that he has caused them to experience, because he'll be whisked away to a world where race doesn't matter. I don't know. I think it would be really, really interesting, especially with Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them. They always talked about there's this great war between the humans and the magical folk, and that's why Hogwarts has to be kept a secret. It makes me wonder. It makes me curious about what could have possibly threatened the humans to the point where they wouldn't want magic anymore. I don't know. Let me know what you guys think. I personally find this all to be extremely interesting with all of the race theory and whatnot, but I'd love to hear what you guys think. As always, thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!